You get the impression that the internal combustion engine is on borrowed time. We're living in a world of urbanization, increasingly stringent emissions regulations, electric vehicles and mobility. And it's not just car makers that are now having to supply electric vehicles for the consumer, but motorcycle companies too. And when arguably the most famous motorcycle company in the world is presenting electric vehicles, you need to take note and acknowledge that this is a start of a whole new era. This is the Livewire, and it's the company's first all-electric vehicle in its history, and its mission is to try and encourage a whole new generation of customers into the Harley-Davidson brand. Now, for this younger generation of riders, technology is the most important factor. So what you're looking at here is a 15.5 kilowatt hour lithium ion battery. It's made of 70 lithium ion cells, co-developed with Samsung, and they're all stacked up here, and underneath is the electric motor. Now, the electric motor is cased in this beautiful aluminium casting, and it develops the equivalent of 105 horsepower and 88 pounds-foot of torque, which might not sound a lot, but you've got to remember, because it is electric, you get maximum torque at 0 RPM, so this is going to be quick enough. Harley says the Livewire has a maximum range of 146 miles, but expect less than 100 miles really if your riding is a bit more spirited. What's interesting about the design is that it is actually quite conventional and motorcycle-like. Rather than go for a battery monocoque construction architecture like we've seen from companies like ARC, this one uses a more conventional frame plus battery plus motor, and the idea here is to convince Harley's existing members of the community to get into electrified vehicles. So what's it like? Well, I've got to say, it's probably the most un-Harley I have ever ridden, and that starts from the moment you switch the thing on. There's hardly any sound. There isn't a Harley sound. When you're on it, there is this kind of resonance or rumble that you get from the electric motor, which I guess is there to try and remind you of those glory days of the V-twin. But as soon as you roll on the throttle, that sort of motion dissipates, and it sounds more like one of those land speeders you've seen in Star Wars. And the performance is similarly Star Wars-esque. 0 to 60 miles an hour takes a Ducati worrying 3 seconds, and it'll top out at 110 miles an hour, and that is plenty when you've got no fairings going on here. And also, it's got an agility, this bike, that you wouldn't expect from a Harley-Davidson. The way the thing can change direction, the way that all the mass is so centralized, so even though it is quite a heavy bike, it doesn't feel it. And the way that you've got so many rider modes to play with, you've never really had that sort of functionality of going through multiple stages of traction control, corner and ABS, rider modes that impact the regenerative braking. So there's a lot of bandwidth here to get used to and enjoy with this bike. But where I would say that this thing really stands out is in town. It is such a serene experience when you're just cruising around with this thing in the city of Portland with no sound, no emissions. It feels more culturally acceptable to be riding in this thing. And also, it's here where you really appreciate the simplicity of having a roll-on throttle and having that effortless performance, because it's in those moments in town where you want any extra bit of brain capacity dedicated on monitoring your surroundings and being a better defensive rider. And what's also interesting is that you don't get any of that heat leaching from the battery like you would on a traditional internal combustion engine. So it's actually way more comfortable to sit on this thing in town and wait around in traffic as it would be in a regular petrol engine. So I guess the question is that has this proven from Harley-Davidson that you can have an entertaining and successful future with no cylinders and no noise? And on this evidence, unequivocally, yes, it's a fantastic bike that deserves to do well. I think the biggest challenge now for Harley is going to be the price point, because this thing is going to retail at £28,995 when it heads to dealers in the UK at the end of 2019. And that's a big ask. You do have to pay a premium for technology, of course, but it's still pretty punchy. So Harley is going to be so reliant on that existing customer base to take the leap of faith. And hopefully by them doing that, is that this will hopefully create a whole new wave of Livewire products in the future that maybe one day you and I can afford.